Welcome to Dare, the show for startup leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs who dare to shape the future. Dare is brought to you by the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network, OEN, and Darwaft, the superpower tech team that can make your vision a reality. The Dare Show is excited to welcome Beth Hannon to the show. Today, she is the CEO and founder of AccessiCart. It's a global services agency that helps e-commerce brands widen their audience and become more inclusive through digital accessibility, including ADA and EAA compliance. So, Beth, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Ned. Thanks for having me.
So, tell me about AccessiCart. What's your mission and how are you accomplishing that?
Yeah, so a lot of people don't, when I go to networking events, sometimes people are surprised that they've never really thought about how people with disabilities might have to use the web a little differently. And so we talk about people who are blind might use a screen reader, which is a tool that reads out loud things to them, or people might have adaptive devices if they have mobility impairments, or people who are deaf might need audio things related to video and audio.
Hmm.
So we talk a lot about how we help sites make sure that they're not excluding any people with disabilities. People with disabilities are about 20 to 25% of all adults across most industrialized nations. And that only increases as the average age of that nation increases. And so it's actually now about closer to 28% in the US. And
Really?
so sometimes people think it's a really small number of people. And so then or that people with disabilities never buy their product. And that's usually not true as well. So, yeah. So we help
Yeah.
them to widen those audiences, but also there are legal requirements as well. So we can help them with that.
Yeah. Well, so how did you come to found this company?
Yeah, that's a real. So before this, I was running a more general web development agency. Before
Hmm.
that, I had been in nonprofit management
Mm.
and got downsized in the early 2008 financial crisis and kind of stumbled into freelancing and then developed an agency. And we had a client in 2015, so 10 years ago, that came to us was an agency of the state of California. And they told us they needed to make their website accessible. So our team dived into that. The
Mm.
agency helped us do that. And it just became this light bulb moment for our team. Everybody on our team realized they knew somebody, a family member, a friend who
Mhm.
was impacted in this way. And that it just became this amazing kind of purpose driven piece that we
Mm.
could kind of contribute, what things that we could contribute for that. And then in 2022, so 3 years ago, we were kind of looking at who we were starting to serve and realizing that
Mm.
80% of the ADA website lawsuits in the US, things are driven mostly by lawsuits here, 80% of those are e-commerce sites. And so we kind
Yeah.
of began to niche down and specialize then in serving e-commerce is kind of its own special animal, right? And so a lot of
Mhm.
interaction and functionality. And so we specialize in that, although we still do things for government or other folks too. So
Yeah. Well, so it's really interesting. You've looked at the data and you found a real market need there. And my understanding is that it's not just legal requirement. Like back in the day, I remember a manager of mine at Adobe said there are only three reasons to build a product. One is to make money, to save money, or to stay out of jail, right? It's a legal requirement, right? And
yes.
so I thought, talking to you, that it would just be a legal requirement. But what you're implying here is there's actually money to be made in
Oh,
accessibility. Is
absolutely.
that right? Tell
Absolutely.
us.
So it's kind of, there's not a lot of research that's done, but there's some. And the research shows that if you make your site more accessible for people with disabilities, what happens is that you improve the user experience for everyone, right? And so we see this, we call this actually the curb cut effect. So, the curb cuts in the sidewalk where the wheelchairs can go or the scooters.
Yeah.
But we all use those when we're on roller skates or bicycles or strollers. They have an impact for everybody. And so we see that in the digital world too. When you make things more accessible for people with disabilities who identify as disabled, you're actually making that user experience better for all kinds of people. For instance, people over 50 might not identify as disabled, but they're starting to have more trouble with print or the color contrast.
Right.
The colors change, our color perception changes as we age because the lens of the eye yellows. And so
Hmm.
making your things more have good color contrast will improve your conversions and your revenue. And so that the amount that changes depends on how bad were the barriers before, but it can go up anywhere from, a half a percent to, there are studies showing there's a famous one using Tesco grocery stores in the UK, and their conversion rate was 37%. Now,
What? That's
absolutely, yeah.
amazing.
Well,
37%
okay,
higher
so
conversion rate.
it's kind of a unicorn. You got to think about that, right? So it's groceries. So people are having that. It's every week kind of thing, at least, maybe more often. It's a regular thing. People are coming back, how frequently they're ordering, but
Yeah.
also this people with disabilities might be more inclined to do things with, in something
Hmm.
that's accessible. And so that's kind of unicorn, but we see pretty regularly anywhere from, half a percent up to 5 to 7%, right? So for instance, we've seen an e-commerce site where there was, say you're going to sell shirts
Hmm.
and you have variations. You have people can pick a red shirt or a blue shirt or a green shirt. But if the people who are blind, people who are mobility impaired, both depend on what's called keyboard navigation. So they're using
Hmm.
the tab and the enter key and maybe the space bar or the arrow keys to
Right,
get
right.
through the site. But we've seen e-commerce sites where the person can get to the product page, but they can't ever navigate into select a variation. They can't pick a blue or a green or a red. And so they can't ever then get a product into the cart. And so if you've got a
Oh,
big
fascinating.
problems like that, then you're going to get a bigger impact, right? Because now it's easier to do. And by the way, it's not just people with disabilities that use keyboard navigation. Lots of people know that they can tab through things and hit the enter key. And so, you're creating more friction when you don't provide that. And so, but yeah, if you have some big problems, you can do that. And so I think accessibility is one of the few compliances where you can, it pays for itself, right? If
Mm.
you It might pay for itself in if you're a small company. I mean, you don't have much revenue. So that's going to be the case for maybe a lot of startups. Maybe they don't have a really high e-commerce revenue yet. It'll take longer to pay off, right? Because it's a percentage gain, right? But if you're doing 5 million, $10 million in revenue, it can be less than 6 months before you pay off that compliance. And you're making money then, right? Does that make sense, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So you're making money by being compliant. That's all it takes.
Yeah,
That's really
exactly.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's an unsung opportunity that by being legally compliant, you can lift your overall company, you can lift where your company is going, and you can also make it appeal to a broader proportion of the population. Is that right?
Yeah, not only that, but you can get some brand bounce, right? You can talk about how your brand is more inclusive, right? Your brand
Hmm.
is welcoming everyone. And the flip side can be true too, right? If you're not accessible and people start complaining about that, then it can be a PR nightmare for your brand as well,
Hmm.
right?
Absolutely. So when you talk to customers about this, and I assume most of your customers are businesses, right?
Yeah.
That's who you're working
Yeah.
with, e-commerce shops, etc. You're explaining this value. How much work does it take? I mean, do they have to start over with their website or how hard is it?
Oh, usually not start over, although there is a
Hmm.
kind of a tipping point at which, depending on, you may have to do some significant design changes, right? If all your color scheme stuff doesn't have great contrast, right? Typically, you're not starting over, you're making changes.
Hmm.
And really, sometimes people are surprised to hear this, but no site is ever 100% accessible, right?
Mm.
So think about it. That would have to be absolutely no barriers for anybody, no matter what their disability or combinations of disabilities. And the fact that anytime the website changes, you can introduce new problems, and e-commerce sites are changing all the time, right? So you're never going to get to 100%. You certainly should start and deal with the low-hanging fruit, the things that are preventing people from purchasing from you, absolutely right. But you're going to typically think about this as a continuous improvement sort of a strategy
Yeah.
and deal with that. And the lawsuits both here and the kind of, we think true, although it's still developing in Europe in terms of the new European Accessibility Act, that really what will be the legal defense for you is having evidence of that continuous improvement, that you have some documented evidence that you are regularly testing and fixing, and they're documenting what has been fixed. And that's kind of what we provide. We provide a kind of turnkey way to do that. But if your people can do it on their own, they don't have to use us, right? But doing that regular testing and then fixing of problems and documenting all of that. And that's what gives you in the US, these things are almost always settled out of court, hopefully out of court, keeps you out of the public documents, the brand out of the public documents. But if you have that stack of, reports that your attorney can take to the negotiating table,
Hmm.
that gives you the leverage to get the settlement down quite a lot. So
Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah. So you came out of a background that wasn't necessarily building systems like this. So tell me more about your heritage in the tech world and all the learning that brought you to this stage.
yeah. So I think one of the interesting things is that I grew up in a bit of a retail family. My grandparents ran a little corner mom and pop grocery store. So I think about that occasionally, that in terms of what I do with e-commerce and understanding how some of that works, I think that does inform that. I also grew up in a family that was techie gadgety. My dad was the
Hmm.
ultimate, still is the ultimate gadget guy in terms of exposing us to technology and doing a lot of that. My brothers are both electrical engineers. And initially, I was really more centered in human services and kind of went
Mm.
that direction, but have ended up more employing the technology to, make the world a better place. That's the cool thing about what we do. It's great for the brand, but and we often are working with the agencies or in-house IT teams, and we
Hmm.
help them, and ultimately we're making the web a more accessible place for everybody.
That's exciting. So where do you hope to take the company next?
Yeah, so we're continuing to grow our continuous improvement plans.
Hmm.
That's really where we're doing some focusing. We still do like people do tend to historically think of this as kind of more project based. They get a big audit and then they fix those problems and not really systemically. So we try to help people think more systemically about not creating new problems, helping do some training with them, but really sort of growing those monthly plans where we're working on helping them identify new problems, support them in how to fix them, document that they're fixed, and providing those reports that are the legal defense. And so, yeah, trying to grow that a little bit more, I think.
Great. So do you feel like the gospel of accessibility is out there? Do you think we could do more about messaging around this critical problem?
Well, I think there's still a lot more to do about messaging. I mean, like I said, I go to networking events and people haven't even thought about it before. They're usually receptive to that. I think a lot of times, the marketing managers or the people who are managing the website for a brand often are aware at some level that it's something they need to do, but they think about it as a nice to have. And so or they think that it will be massively expensive. And there are some
Mm.
ways that that can be mitigated, right? To begin to think about it as a sort of smaller continuous improvement project. But
Hmm.
they put it off until they get sued. And so in the US, that's typically what happens is that these web accessibility lawsuits, there are what we try to kindly say are serial plaintiffs. They really people, typically a person who's blind or sometimes a person who's deaf, who are collaborating with an attorney, usually at the pair of them together, who will sue dozens and dozens of websites. And people are surprised that it's usually not the disabled plaintiff, the blind person, who's
Really?
getting the money. It's primarily a strategy for the attorney to drive up the fees because when you sue under ADA, the site owner almost always, 99.9% of the time, has to make the website accessible. But they also
Mm.
have to pay not only their own legal fees, but the plaintiff's legal fees. And that was set
Mm.
up under ADA so that people with disabilities could are often people without a lot of resources, right? And so it was set up in such a way that they could bring a complaint about a physical space, a storefront that didn't have a way to get in the door, for instance, but not have to front their own legal fees. So the
Mm.
attorneys find this a lucrative practice and they drive up the fees, but it's typically not the people with disabilities getting a lot of the money because that would endanger, if they have any kind of public assistance disability benefits, that would endanger those. So they don't tend to get a lot of that. But
Interesting.
it's a strategy for driving those up. And so we have seen about 4,000 cases the last few years. We
Hmm.
are on track now this year to hit over 5,000 of those cases that are documented cases in federal and state courts. But we know that somewhere between closer to four, almost five times that many are settled before they get to court. And that's what the brand really wants to do if they can, because they want to if they can keep their brand name out of those court documents, they can
Right. That would be good.
minimize their risk of being sued again. What often happens is that people are sued, once and they do a settlement and they think it's all done and then they get sued. And maybe by the second or third time, they say, maybe we should just make the site more accessible. Right? And so
Yeah.
it's possible to have more than one suit. About 25% of the cases in court are people that have been sued before. So,
Fascinating. Well, just a side note here. Back many years ago, I was a web developer. And
aha,
I remember we actually got an award for a website that was for the University of Washington HIT Lab, which is a Human Interface Technology Lab. And we got an award for being an accessible website. And the way that we did that was we actually built it as a text website first, like focused on how would this appear as just text, and we alt tagged everything. We made sure that everything showed up, and then we made it look pretty for people who didn't have to worry about the text. And what's fascinating about that is it was good development practice. Like somebody could
absolutely.
read our code and see exactly what was happening in the code, and it wasn't a big kludgy mess. And so, besides the legal ramifications and the revenue possibilities that Beth has just told us about, it technically it's also the right thing to do to help your developers understand what's underneath the hood.
Well, not only that, it'll help your site performance, right? And your
Yeah.
SEO, right? And so it's anytime you can use semantic HTML, you'll be miles ahead, right?
Yeah.
If you're not trying to do a bunch of cutesy things with JavaScript or all of those kinds of things, the more you can use semantic HTML, the better off you'll be, better performance, and better SEO. And we can talk about that's traditional SEO. So when you're doing things like making sure you have a properly nested heading structure and alt text on your images, that's really supports what we would now think of as traditional SEO. When you are talking about the new AI search capabilities, AI
Hmm.
search is really doing it a little differently. It's not really looking at the ingesting the code in the same way. It's really taking screenshots and using something similar to OCR. So that means that you want to make sure that your color contrast is good, right? Because if the OCR can't really read your fonts to know what's going to happen, then because the color contrast is bad, you're losing out on some of that agentic search as well. So,
Right, right. Fascinating. So in the new age of AI, we have additional problems with accessibility.
oh, it's a different strategy. And then, we haven't talked yet about oftentimes you might see on a site a little accessibility widget. And if you ever
Hmm.
click on it, it'll open up a panel. Those tools are called overlays. What they try to do is they try to scan the site for problems and try to fix those on the fly with a little bit of JavaScript. They also offer some additional tools for doing things like a screen reader or magnification. They create a lot of problems. So what they used to market themselves as, just install our tool and you will be completely compliant. And one of them, a company called Accessibility, had to pay $1 million judgment for false advertising around that. Because
Really?
these, well, automated tools and checkers will only get you about 30% of the way. They will only find about 30% of issues. And the rest has to be tested for manually because a lot of it is contextual, but a lot of it is just things that we can't automate yet in terms of
Yeah.
testing. And so they will get you part way, but the overlays also have tools that conflict with the existing tools that are, if a user is disabled, say they're visually impaired and need a screen reader, they already have a screen reader on their machine. Or if they need
Right.
a magnification tool, it's already on their computer and they're already using it. So these are kind of performative in that way, right? You're making people think you're pretty cool providing these tools, but what it does is the code conflict and neither tool works at all. And so I've had
Mm.
a lot of blind people that I talk to that are, technically savvy say they try to block the IP address of those overlays at the router level so they don't have to deal with them because what it does is means they can't do anything at all on the site. So, and then
uh,
what we are seeing in the last year and a half is that increasingly those more predatory lawsuits are now targeting those tools in the tech stack. So they can search
wow.
and find those tools in the tech stack. And it's an easy jump to say, you knew you should have been doing something about accessibility.
And
You
yet
installed
you
this
did not.
tool and it did not fix everything. And so it's a more of a target anymore than an actual fix for you. So, there's a use case if you need to fix some things in a hurry, need to have something in a hurry
Hmm.
while you're fixing the rest of everything.
Hmm.
But it's not really a long term easy, we all wish there was an easy button, right? It's
Right.
sometimes complicated, but these are not the best ones. there's a great website called overlayfactsheet.com, and
Okay,
it'll
we'll
tell
put it in the
you.
show notes.
Yeah, put it in the package show notes because it's got a listing of, well, the brand names of some of the overlays. So you can say, well, is this an overlay or not? But also it
Hmm.
tells about how they function and why they're problematic. And it's signed by over 900 accessibility professionals, including me, talking about what, attesting to the fact that they are a problem for people with disabilities. They create more problems
Mm,
than they solve. Yeah,
got it. Okay. Well, I know that you're in Oregon.
I
And
am.
so I'm curious if you could tell us what the Oregon ecosystem has been like for entrepreneurs like you. What kind of support have you found, and how could we make it better?
Ah, I love the Oregon Entrepreneur Net. When I first moved to Bend, I live in Bend, and first started getting acquainted in the business community. People said, "Oh, you need to go to or Bend Venture Conference," and I was like, "Oh, I'm not sure. I don't know." And the second year, enough people said it. I went, and it was just like, "Oh, I found my tribe of people. These are the cool people, great ideas." I just love to talk about entrepreneurial ideas and how they're
Yeah.
playing it out, and so that's been awesome to do, and certainly we've gotten some support from some of those business. We tend not to, and I do get it, when you're a startup, you've gotta make some hard choices about where you're focusing your energy and your time, so we don't see a lot of startup. It tends to be that people don't seek out our services until, A, they get sued, or they hit
Mm-hmm.
somewhere around $5 million in revenue, because that's the tipping point for really kind of quickly paying off that investment in the improved revenue. And so, but I do love to do that. And, but our clients are global anymore. And so I go to a lot of e-commerce trade shows and things, but I still love hanging out with entrepreneurs and folks in Oregon. So
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
sounds good. Well, last question for you is what
Yeah.
do you dare to dream?
Oh, I am dreaming of a day when, what we do allows people with disabilities to have independence and a sense of human dignity. They don't have to ask friends and family members to do things for them. They get us. So my dream is a day where nobody has to ask for help purchasing something
Mm,
online when
mhm.
they have a disability.
Okay, that's a great dream. It seems like that should be doable, right?
Well, I hope so, but it's a long haul and, it's a slow movement, but that's my hope.
Yeah, great. Well,
That
thank you
sense
for
of
sharing that dream
independence
with
and human
us.
dignity is really kind of a piece of what drives us.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Beth. Great to chat with you.
Awesome.
Great to hear your thoughts on this, and we wish you all the best at AccessiCart.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks to our guests today for their insights into the entrepreneurial ecosystem. We wish you all the best in your startup journey. The Dare Show is brought to you by the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network and by Darwaf, the superpower tech team that can make your vision a reality. Visit us at oen.org or at darwaf.io. Thanks again for listening. Till next time.